Labor will make medicines cheaper for millions of Australians.
Adam wants to build things when he grows.
There you go. We will increase the maximum childcare subsidy and make it cheaper for 96% of families. A policy for affordable housing for essential workers.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers regularly argued in the lead-up to last night's budget that the primary influence driving it would be inflation. That made the cost of living promises that Labor made during the election campaign all the more crucial to deliver.
This is a government that delivers on our promises.
And there was even more cost of living relief with an expansion of paid parental leave that had not been foreshadowed in the campaign. But the one pledge the government didn't, and in reality couldn't deliver on last night, was a pledge to cut household energy bills by $275 by 2025. Instead, last night's budget was forecasting energy costs rising by 20% this year and 30% next year.
I know that you don't want a heap of kind of partisan reflections here, but what we're seeing now in that 20% is part of what Angus Taylor hid from the Australian people during the election campaign.
The claims and counterclaims about energy prices have been one of the few points of contention since last night's budget. Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor went out hard on the government's silence on the $275 of savings.
What we've seen in the budget is Labor saying that electricity prices are going to go up by 50% in the next several years and gas prices going up by 40%. That's a major breach of an election commitment. They promised that they would go down by $275.
Circumstances outside of their control.
Well, election commitments are election commitments, though, Sarah, as you know.
Some of you will recall he made quite an unusual intervention to prevent the publication of the change to the default market offer. And so this 20% that we're in right now, which is starting to show up in bills and starting to show up in figures, is actually part of that.
In some ways, the scrapping over energy cost promises hardly mattered among the budget's sombre forecasts and the pain households are already feeling from higher mortgage, rent, food and petrol prices.
As a Labor government, as Labor people, we feel that. We care about that. It keeps us awake. We see what rising prices means for families, taking more from hip pockets and pushing people closer to the edge. And whether it's food, whether it's electricity, whether it's rent, inflation is public enemy number one. Inflation is the dragon we need to slay.
The spectre of that dragon reared up today when the Bureau of Statistics announced the annual inflation rate had jumped to 7.3% in the September quarter, the highest since 1990. But even amid the gloomy inflation news, much of the post-budget commentary focused on the ominous message the budget delivered about future tax and spending decisions. The government is expected to collect more tax in the next couple of years as a result of higher prices for our energy exports. But that is not expected to last. Burgeoning spending pressures, however, are another thing. The Treasurer once again noted today the 5 big spending pressures on the budget: health, aged care, the NDIS, defence and, now the fastest growing cost, interest on government debt.
Now, many of the factors contributing to increases in revenue since the pre-election outlook are temporary. They are forecast to fade and fall, as you saw in the budget papers. But the factors contributing to spending growth are expected to get bigger every year, constant and compounding pressures on the budget.
One thing that inflation does and growth does is that nominal GDP means we will collect more tax. But the real question is, what do we do with it and how sustainable is it? So the conversation we need to have is, what are the things we want to spend money on? Can we spend them efficiently? And then what do we want to raise and how do we raise that efficiently and equitably?
The past few decades have seen governments on both sides set various constraints and targets for spending and tax, so-called budget rules. Last night, the Treasurer dumped the previous coalition cap on tax collections of 23.9% of GDP, a political number designed to enshrine the tax rate at the end of the Howard era as a gold standard of economic management.
The tax to GDP cap has gone. Now, no credible economist would think that the tax to GDP cap of the past made a lot of sense. It didn't. The fact that it's gone means we can now have actually a better conversation about expenditures as well as tax. not just have a simplistic debate about tax and the return of bracket creep.
The Treasurer is not ruling out tax reform. He doesn't want to say too much about it, though he did today rule out increasing the rate or the coverage of the goods and services tax. But doing something about alarming blowouts in spending seems to be more of a priority.
And I think we've been pretty upfront about that in saying, well, that's how we've demonstrated that budgets can be about restraint and trimming spending and sensible tax reform. And whether there's 2 more budgets in the life of this parliament or 3 more budgets in the life of this parliament, I think people should expect the same kind of combination in the budgets that we're yet to hand down as we saw in the budget yesterday.
Budget forecasts that the cost of the National Disability Insurance Scheme will grow by 14% a year for the next decade, growth which represents eventual costs of hundreds of billions of dollars, are causing particular alarm. The forecast blowout isn't just because a lot more people and a broader range of disabilities have been included in the scheme. The NDIS was originally supposed to work alongside services that would continue to be provided by state and local governments and the community sector. Instead, many of these services have been wound down, leaving the NDIS as the oasis in the desert.
This is complicated. It's the federal government, it's the states, it's councils, and it's private providers and not-for-profits. Bringing them together is a conversation around reform and integration that can help put the system on a more sustainable footing, because what it actually does is really important for Australia.